Is there a way to combine a passion for social justice with a cookbook project? Today's guest has done just that. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Molly Stevens, and I am here today with Kristin Donnelly. Hey, Kristin.
Hey, Molly.
So we talk about traditional publishing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about hybrid publishing, self-publishing. But today's guest, I think, is a kind of a none of the above or some of the above, all of the above.
Yeah, they wrote a book that's traditionally published, but through a small publisher. But yeah, it's not self-publishing at all. It's definitely working with a publisher. It's like a very different structure to your deal.
Yeah.
I feel like it's something that probably existed more before there was so much consolidation in the publishing world, you know? But now that it feels like there's fewer and fewer publishers for all kinds of books, but for cookbooks especially, this type of like cool indie press cookbook is more rare.
Right. I mean, we used to refer to 10 Speed as an indie publisher,
right.
You know?
Yeah.
The book is The Revolution Will Be Well Fed by Corrie Locke-Hardy, and it's published by a very small press in the Northwest called Raspberry Bow.
Yeah.
Which I think does one or two titles a season.
Yeah.
So truly indie. I'm very excited to talk to Corrie about it. Corrie Locke-Hardy owns The Tiny Activist, a consulting business that focuses on social justice, education, and literacy. Corrie's worked in the restaurant industry and also a former classroom teacher. Mm. So I feel like this book is really a combination.
Combination of like all the things.
All the things in their past life. Yeah. Let's get to it. Corrie, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, congratulations on the book, and we feel like it's an important book to talk about.
Thank you. I am excited, and I happen to agree with you.
So let's get right into the book. This is your debut cookbook.
Yeah, this is my first book of any type.
So how did it come to be?
Well, as I'm sure like many of your other guests, they have nice fond memories of, baking and things like that. I feel like I didn't actually realize that making a cookbook was a job until I was a teenager. It kind of struck me when I was making some Hello Kitty shaped cakes for the teen advisory committee at the library, the starting of my illustrious career.
Awesome.
And, I was like putting the final touches on it, and it kind of struck me. I was like, oh my goodness, people do this for a job. That's wild.
Right.
I'll probably never be able to figure it out, but like, that's wild that there are people who can do that. And so I think it kind of sat as like a little seed in my brain until many, many years later. Initially, I got into the restaurant industry where I worked for about 9 years, kind of. I like to say doing every job that doesn't pay very well. So, wasn't the manager or the owner. That's kind of really where I got into baking and pastry and really focused on specifically pastry and bread, mostly in Boston proper. My spouse and I, we were in talks to kind of buy into an existing bakery as partners. That ended up falling through. So I decided to radically change lanes and go back to school for education. I got involved with early education, social justice, foundational classroom stuff, and taught for a few years. Kind of found myself on Instagram reviewing picture books for social justice, kind of doing some consulting, working on literacy and advocacy. So I decided to start a hashtag called #SweetsAndSocialJustice, just for something for me to do.
It's combining sort of your past, your journey to this point, right? You have this love for baking, this professional experience, and then your work as a teacher and in social justice. So
exactly. There you go. You get it. I should have known that y'all would have gotten it immediately. Yeah, kind of started doing that. Then at the beginning of 2021, I just happened to see a free webinar online that was for people who are interested in writing cookbooks. That individual, who you two know very well, is Sally Eckes.
Friend of the pod.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not a light bulb that goes off when you see that. It's a Hello Kitty shaped light bulb that goes off in your head.
Exactly.
That's very cool. Yeah. And I do often say, I guess when we're talking to authors, like sometimes the best ideas come from like a Venn diagram of a couple of different interests, or like how can you find that place of overlap? You did. So tell us how you went from that potential idea, this hashtag, to then a book.
When I had the opportunity to attend the webinar, I didn't know who Sally was. I was just excited to find a webinar. And at the very end of it, she said, does anybody want to pitch me their idea? And I was like, this is an opportunity that does not come around. Hardly ever. I gave a general idea of the book. It wasn't the book in its final form. It had about half of the title. I was like, I have this idea, like the revolution will be well fed, social justice essays and baked goods, and I think it would be really cool. Sally's like, that does sound really unique. You know, here are a couple tips for going about next steps. Then I was off to the races. It turns out a year and a half later, Sally and I live very close to each other, a couple
That's
blocks.
Funny.
Oh, wow, that close.
Yeah, so she lives very, very close to the children's indie bookstore that I have worked at for about 3.5 years.
High five.
Yeah, high five. The most magical place on earth. Yeah, we just like met in person.
Corrie, I'm listening to you talk about that, doing that pitch at that webinar, which, if I understand, you did not come prepared with a pitch to the webinar, because we've done some pitch slams with Sally.
Mm-hmm. That sounds super fun.
And so I've seen her we've seen her in action, and she's so quick and good.
Sharp, yeah.
Sharp. The feedback.
Like really pointed, yeah.
Incredible.
So good for you for like stepping up and saying, I'll put my idea out there.
And then did you take some of her advice?
I did, absolutely. So her advice, because I didn't have an agent, I just basically had an idea and a nice lady gave me advice. Her advice was to look around for, comps, because her reasoning, which I have held on to and tell everybody, sort of no matter what, she was like, the more information that you know and the more you know about the topic, the better you're going to be able to advocate for yourself and to be able to really have a clear, coherent vision for when you're telling other people. That was her main advice was, okay, if you want to do this, great. Look at the cookbooks you like. Do any of them have the same photographer? Do any of them have the same agent or stylist? And she gave me some tips to look for trends to be able to more clearly define my idea, which I thought was just brilliant advice.
It is. Did you actually then work up some kind of proposal?
No. Oh, I'm so sorry. I did everything through a weird side door.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
So I was doing this research for comparable titles. I was online and I found this really incredible book called the 2019 Washington Women's Cookbook. It was actually sort of a reimagined fundraiser because the original 1919 Women's Cookbook was a suffrage fundraiser. It included a whole bunch of recipes from suffragettes that were in the area and were working, except they were all affluent white women, which wasn't nearly a representative sample. So the 2019 Washington Women's Cookbook reimagined the first one and included all of the activists and the suffragettes of color and who were maybe a lower socioeconomic status as kind of this came first, but here's really what it should have been. And I loved that idea. I thought it was so brilliant. The art style is fantastic. It was printed on risograph. I ordered a copy of the book, and then I was on the website. At the very bottom of the website, it says, have a great idea? Send me an email. And something about me, I know how to follow directions. So I was like, okay. I sent this email to Michelle, who is the publisher at Raspberry Boat Press. I said, hi, your website said to email you if you have a great idea. I think I have a pretty great idea. Here it is. So we had a couple meetings, really got along. It was just kindred spirits. And so she was like, I would love to publish your book. And I said, great, I don't have a book. I just have an idea. Because again, no proposal.
And so you developed the book with Michelle, really? You developed the outline and how did that happen? Okay.
Bless Michelle. She was kind of like, okay, I really like your idea. Do you want me to help or do you just want to give me a manuscript in 6 months? And I was like, I'll just give you a manuscript in 6 months.
Did you talk about how big it would be or how many, the scope?
In vague numbers.
Okay.
In very vague numbers. Okay. I cannot stress enough how laissez-faire and atypical these conversations were.
Mm-hmm. It's so cool in some ways because I actually feel like most authors picture it being this way because it is, I imagine, maybe a dreamy way of working, like figure it out as you go along, right? And we're often saying, no, you got to figure it out way before you even start pitching. You gotta know how many pages. You gotta know how many recipes. And if you go the traditional publishing, which this is a version of traditional publishing, but like other types of traditional publishing, that is true. But in this case, you got to do this more like figure it out as you go along, which does sound really fun.
Yeah, it was really fun. It also kind of felt right because my project was like pretty grassroots. You know, it's a small indie publisher. Michelle worked at bigger West Coast houses for, you know, about a decade, like Sasquatch, Clarkson Potter and stuff. Started Raspberry Bow Press because she was like, I can do this more ethically. I can be more ethical to my creators. I really admired that about her. So I think that kind of also played into how we decided it. But I am also pretty good at just a deadline. Like if I have a vision, you know, we chatted, we were like, okay, 3 sections, probably about 50 recipes, some essays. And then I was pretty much let loose for 6 months from...
6 months.
Yeah, from the end of September 2022 to the middle of March.
I want to keep going on this, but I do want to back up and ask where you found that Washington women's cookbook.
I found it on the publisher's website. I was just searching online. I think I was searching feminist cookbooks or, you know, something. I had some sort of vague search terms like that and just kind of wandered across it.
I want to get back to the word ethical only because I guess it would be nice to define that even more for our listeners. When Michelle was saying to do it more ethically, what does that mean?
In this specific instance, she was talking about having more open lines of communication between the creator and the publishing houses. She was also talking about giving me a higher royalty percentage. I have a much higher royalty percentage than all of the author friends that I know. And also, happy to talk more about that. Nothing changes if we don't say real numbers. Michelle really, really emphasized that she wanted the final product to feel like it was my vision. I think sometimes that isn't put to the forefront with maybe larger houses that are working on more titles at once and have more staff members, more things going on. You know, I was their only fall title last fall when I came out. So I got all the attention.
When you had 6 months, did you sign a contract at that point with Raspberry Bow?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I signed a contract.
Okay. If I understand, there was no advance.
No.
So you signed a contract that you would deliver a manuscript to be published, and Raspberry Bow would cover the costs of, they would edit it, they would design it, they would print it.
They did all the photos. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
They did absolutely everything in terms of the book production, like I said, including the photo shoot, which was another sort of atypical experience, is I actually got to fly out to Seattle and I baked the whole cookbook.
Oh, how cool.
Everything that's in the book, I got to make, which was great because, one, I have a lot of anxiety and I would have been like, but what do they look like? Do they look nice? What kind of sprinkles?
I do want to talk a little bit about the development, the 6 months of developing these 50 recipes. That's all on your dime. They're not giving you any money for ingredients or your time. So you're still working at the bookstore and doing your consulting and doing this on the side.
Yeah, it was very much the freelance life of having a whole handful of things and then also this project on top of it. And I stepped back from maybe a couple of my smaller consulting projects to make more time, but I got to be in control and, you know, decide what I want to test, when I want to test it. And I'm super excited with the final results. You don't need silverware for anything. Everything is handheld.
That is pretty cool. Right. From the very beginning, you talk about activism being for everybody. And so Molly and I were just commenting, like, you're telling a lot of historical stories. Sometimes there's like heaviness involved. And then there's lightness with the recipes. But it seems like because there's this umbrella of, yeah, this is for everyone, it works.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad. What I really wanted is, like, I would read a textbook with a handful of recipes, you know, sprinkled in, but most people won't. So it was really important that what I created was accessible for everybody and also interesting enough for people to want to find out more on their own. So much of social justice and community organizing takes place internally first before anything happens. You do a lot of learning, you do a lot of unlearning. You just kind of prepare yourself internally for, working with other people and things like that. It's not a checklist. So I was hoping to kind of make it exciting enough that people would be like, what? I need to learn more.
Well, it's interesting. You say somewhere that for yourself, your 9 years of baking and working in hospitality and restaurants, a lot of that working with your hands is time for reflection and thinking. And so what I'm hearing you say is that you're offering that to your readers of the book. Here's this essay on the history of whether it's the Black Panthers or the Hull House, it's very broad, but then make a granola bar after you read the essay, it sort of incorporating in that time to bake and make things to share with other people as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I loved so much about working in the restaurant industry is it doesn't really matter, what type of food you're serving, what quality of food you're serving, how much the people are paying for the food. It's a pretty similar feeling of camaraderie in the back of house, right? So I really liked that about the industry. So I'm hoping that that also kind of comes through because there is a lot of heaviness. Community organizing, being an activist, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So being able to lean into the joy and be silly and laugh is also what helps keep us all going and be able to try again.
How did you decide which particular stories of community organizing to tell?
I wanted to tell ones that really illustrated the points that I was trying to make. So even though I have a lot of historical information in there, I don't necessarily describe the book as inherently political. I describe it more so as about thinking about how the media and time sort of impacts historical narratives. So I tried to choose things that I felt really explained and expressed points of that to folks who might not be familiar. Because, I was lucky enough to go to grad school and have a master's degree, but there's a lot of gatekeeping in academia. So I went into it trying to figure out my unique way of blending theory and praxis together. So I think kind of, my book does that.
It does. I was saying sometimes not the organizing actually, but with the theory, it can be so academic.
Yeah.
That maybe it doesn't resonate with people that you're trying to reach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If it's inaccessible, then it's not helpful.
And then recipe-wise, with the recipe titles, you really went for it in terms of thematically.
I tried to make all of them, pretty thematic or at least alliterative. But yeah, some of them really go for it. My granola bars, not prison bars.
Democracy donuts.
Smash the patriarchy, cider donuts. No more monopolies, macchiato, fluff brownies.
The biscotti boycotti is also one of my favorites.
That's funny. How did that list come about?
Honestly, the titles came about because me and a couple of my friends were like, let's get on Zoom and be silly and come up with recipe names. So that's what we did.
I love it.
After you had the recipes, you knew there would be a granola bar and then so you had this list and played with them.
Mm-hmm. I knew that I wanted all the recipes to be handheld because one of the main messages of the book is community over capitalism and sharing and, mutual aid. And it's so much easier to share with people if you don't need to remember to bring forks and plates and napkins and stuff like that. So I felt like by also kind of keeping the recipes easy to share, then that would also embody the community spirit.
Well, and you also talk about inclusivity in the kitchen and making things so everybody has access to them and something that's easy to eat is easier to eat. And I know in a lot of your events, I saw you asked for masks and things like that. And so a handheld fits into that.
Yeah, to slightly back up a little bit, I think that a lot of people, if you say the word activist or activism, there's a very specific image that pops up in your head. It's a person marching, holding a sign on the street, which is great and super important. But I think it's also a little limiting, because if you're unable to do that, or, you physically, mentally, geographically, whatever, if it won't work, then it kind of feels like you don't have a place there. But what I talk a lot about in my workshops is whatever sort of unique personality trait that a person has, the cause that you feel passionate about needs you. Okay, I get really overwhelmed in large crowds, but I can do graphic design. And so who's going to design the flyers for the big march? Who is going to fill out the paperwork? Who is going to call and make sure people have the safety vests that they need? Social justice and movements and organizing, it's so much more than just that one march. So that was kind of another thing, is that I want people to feel empowered to be able to be like, oh, I really care about overfishing, and I know how to do XYZ. Maybe the overfishing alliance in my town, needs my help, kind of thing. That's kind of also what I'm hoping for.
This is just a perspective from a parent, which I am. And I often talk with other parents who are like, oh, I'll do it when my kids graduate, or, I'm too busy with my kids. I think this is just actually a nice example of something where maybe you bake something to,
that's what I was going to say. Make some hand pies.
Yeah, make something, whether with your kids or not, to support a meeting.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. Exactly.
I love that it addresses the everydayness that it can be or should be, and not always the grand things that we think of from those big historical moments.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's how the actual change happens. That's how all of these small laws in small towns change for the better. It's because hundreds of thousands of people that we'll never know their names of did that work and made those calls, and wasn't necessarily looking for notoriety. That's not to say that movements don't need a figurehead and big demonstrations and stuff, but I think I was hoping to convey a little bit more that it's easier to get involved than people might think, and you don't have to change yourself in order to do so.
Mm-hmm. Listening to you talk, I mean, sort of why a cookbook in some ways, and clearly you've explained that through your own Venn diagram, but also that the flexibility of its breakfast, snacks, desserts, but you say several times you could eat them any time of day, so this notion that nothing is, too formalized. I was curious about the decision. You talk about your own, you're a baker, but you avoid gluten. Mm-hmm. And so it's a gluten-free cookbook.
Yeah.
A gluten-free baking cookbook. And yet nowhere, that's not advertised. I mean, you find it when you get into it, and you certainly make the recipes and explain if you do cook with wheat flour, these will work as well. And so I'm just wondering about that choice on your part, and if you had any pushback against that, or any let's make it a gluten-free community cookbook. Or
yeah, I mean, it was a very open conversation. My personal favorite gluten-free flour is the King Arthur one. It's absolutely phenomenal. And not only is it the one that I have found mimics typical wheat flour, the best, but also for anybody else that has food allergies, you get used to opening up a book and being like, okay, what do I have to change? What can or can't I do? Michelle and I, we did kind of go back and forth. We were like, okay, are we going to have gluten-free flour on every recipe, or are we just going to have something at the beginning? And we eventually decided that okay, if folks with food allergies are kind of used to opening the book and being like, okay, how do I make this for me? Then isn't it kind of like a funny spin on its head to open a cookbook? And most people who eat wheat, they'd be like, look at this cookbook, only to be like, haha, you might have to make the surprise changes.
I like that.
Yeah.
With the essays, I mean, they weave through the book. They're not listed in the table of contents. They just, you have to sort of find your way through the book to discover them as you go. What was the process editorially with those essays?
The layout and kind of a large amount of the subject headings was done by Michelle and the layout. And, you know, when I turned in the actual manuscript, we left it a little open because of kind of how I mentioned before. I was like, I don't want a textbook with recipes. I want it to be accessible, and I don't want it to look, you know, quote unquote, like scary of like a whole page of text. So I kind of put all of the information, you know, I was like, if this is my one chance to make a book, like I'm putting everything that I care about inside this book.
Did you weave them together in your manuscript?
Not really. They were all pretty separate. I mean, like the three main essays were separate. And then I kind of had a document with like historical figures that I knew that I wanted to highlight. And then I dumped down like a wheelbarrow full of bricks, and then Michelle like beautifully arranged them into a mosaic.
That's nice, actually, to have that kind of collaboration.
Yeah, and it's interesting to use the term mosaic because from a design standpoint, there's so many elements. There's boxes, there's sidebars, there's recipe heads. They certainly work together as some sort of mosaic. You mentioned earlier, Corrie, that you do graphic work.
Oh, not really. Not really seriously.
I was just curious about your, I mean, clearly you're very happy with this looks the way it looks. It's a very design forward. It's got a real style. It's very zine-like, if that means anything.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is Michelle and the designer Tim and I, all of us kind of have like a deep love for 90s zines and like Riot Girl and stuff like that. So definitely, I'm so glad that you picked up on the zine thing, because that's what we were going for.
It's full. It's busy. There's a lot in it. Yeah.
And the color matching. Ooh, the color matching. It just like makes my brain tickle. It's so great.
Yeah, it's full of color. With the photography, you mentioned going out for the photo shoot. It's nice that the publisher, it sounds like, did they arrange everything in terms of like choosing the photographer? Mm-hmm. Was there a food stylist in addition?
Yeah, there was a food stylist, which also was another really incredible conversation that Michelle and I got to have. So, you know, we were having a meeting planning the photo shoot. For folks who don't know, I am white, Michelle is white, and she was like, okay, so I really want to talk to you because so far it's only white women that are on this project. Like, what do you want to do? And I was like, Michelle, that was on my list and you got there first. Like, just another thing that I was like, we're very aligned, and you appreciate it and you notice that this is something that we should be paying attention to. Yeah, so we found a really incredible photographer named Manuela who does mostly product styling and for retail stuff and sometimes food, which I also think kind of helped the photography be really interesting. And the food stylist that we found in Seattle, her name is Kristina. At the time when we were shooting, she was the only full-time food stylist of color in the city of Seattle. So one, I was super excited and lucky that we get to work with her. And also I feel like it really underscores the point that Michelle and I were trying to make. It was like very intentionally that we put together the team.
So when was the photo shoot?
It was last April. We did 5 days and shot 10 recipes a day.
Oh, wow.
Okay, in April, and then the book came out because the book was printed in the U.S.
Yeah, it was printed in the U.S., which I was also excited about. We, you know, for both the sustainability and like keeping business in North America.
Came out, I don't know, April to September, however many months that is.
Yeah.
A shorter timeline than books printed in China that need to be shipped.
Yeah.
Do you know what the print run was?
It was initially 5,000.
Okay.
You know, which I think is like a pretty standard, typical print run.
Instead of having an advance, you have a higher royalty. Do you mind talking about the percentages?
So I make a 20% royalty until the costs are met for the publisher, and then it bumps up to 40%.
Oh, that's awesome.
You know how many they need to sell when you hit that point, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And that is quite a bit higher, right, Kristin?
Yeah, most royalties, much less. I mean, people often get an advance, but a lot of times then they're paying for the photography out of the advance. So you kind of end up in a similar place where you're doing a lot of work, quote, for free. That's a whole other thing. But it's nice to hear like a different model and talk about there being potential other models.
It's interesting, too, because we talk about hybrid publishing and traditional publishing and self-publishing, but this this is, as Kristin, you mentioned earlier, it's a traditional publisher with differences in that they've taken on all the, the back end, and they've also handled the distribution of the book. And the distribution is unique as well.
Yeah, the publisher also owns an indie bookstore. So they were running a lot of the distribution through the bookstore, although I did just get picked up by Microcosm, which is very exciting. So that just happened probably in the last week or so.
Congratulations.
So it was kind of a combination of they had a whole bunch, they shipped me a whole bunch of books. So like I could fulfill wholesale orders on the East Coast a little bit faster than not having them all on the West Coast, and then also have to pay for the shipping and, the carbon emissions and things like that.
Cool. Something I realized I didn't ask is, because you mentioned having an Instagram presence and building that up, did that at all play into the conversations you had when they were deciding whether or not to do the book?
It was definitely kind of a conversation that we had, although... On my Instagram, The Tiny Activists, I have about 35,000 followers, which is like nothing to sneeze at,
Yeah,
it's like a very solid presence, but also it's one of those things that it's like not really a guarantee. It's like a fake number, kind of,
yeah.
We definitely had conversations because Michelle was also very upfront, and she was like, I haven't done marketing, like typically when I was working in other houses, I had other roles. So like maybe we can work together with marketing, clearly you know how to market yourself a little bit. I wouldn't say it hinged on anything, but it was kind of oh, cool, you did this. Maybe you can help me.
Very cool. How has marketing the book been going?
It has been going pretty well, I think, as well as it could be. One of the things that is in my book, so everything is written by me except for one essay that was written by a friend of mine who owns an apothecary. I gave them the recipes, and then they designed an herbal tea blend that matched the flavor profiles in the book. So the recipe for the tea is in there, and then they also sell the tea in their apothecary. And so they wrote this very beautiful essay about ancestral connection and working on this project together with this tea recipe. And so a lot of the talks that I have been doing is kind of talking about tea and like teaching people how to make balanced flavor profiles and, maybe what to look for. And maybe even during a longer talk, then I spin it around and I'm like, oh, peppermint's a really strong flavor. If you're planning an event, where are you going to put the peppermint friend? Where are they going to shine the most? And then it kind of turns into a metaphor for community organizing and being like, okay, if you have to balance recipe flavors, how are you going to balance the personality flavors of something that you're doing? So
that's great. So have all your events in the fall and the winter been local, like in the Northeast?
I did a tour in Toronto in October, which was really fun. And then I did a tour in Halifax as well. So yeah, international, but like still kind of the New England area. I was in Maine and Boston and stuff.
Those are based on connections that you have?
Yeah. I'm very lucky. My two best friends are Canadian. One's in Toronto and one's in Halifax.
Oh, okay.
Free couch.
Yeah.
When you travel for those, do you travel with a box of books?
When I did my fall tour, I didn't. The publisher sent books ahead, and then I could just sell to the shops and folks. I had a couple. I had some formal bookstore events, and then I also had a pop-up market and stuff like that. So I don't like to do the same thing twice, so I'll pretty much do anything.
Yeah.
Sally actually told us about a signing that was canceled.
Oh, yeah. The book, technically, it hasn't been banned. It has been experiencing some soft censorship, which caused me to have to cancel some events. I was planning this really cool event up in Maine with a couple social service organizations and a college. We were going to have a panel discussion at a bookstore, and it was going to be about food security in rural areas and sort of mutual aid. One of the organizations, it was so awkward. They called a meeting with way too many people to break up with me. They basically let me know. They were like, we can't be affiliated with you. We can't be associated with you. We're afraid of repercussions.
Wow.
You're too radical, which is funny because I'm really not.
Your radical positions on food security and
my radical human rights positions, which is why I have this shirt. Human rights aren't radical, actually. Yeah, basically, these organizations, they canceled, and so I had to cancel the event because I was coming in and traveling. Then they were worried if they were associated with me, then there would be repercussions in the community that I didn't live, but that they lived because they had experienced repercussions from law enforcement and other organizations before.
I see.
Did the event go on without you, or they?
Oh, no, I was the event. Yeah, they pulled out of doing the event, and I was like, I can't do a panel discussion with myself. So, ended up having to cancel it and sort of reconvene. Not an outright banning, more soft censorship, but it also kind of speaks to the sneaky things that are happening. Okay, no, it wasn't outright banned, but, we're kind of stuck in the red tape. Things are getting canceled last minute, or, they're pulling orders, or, stuff like that.
And people deciding to do things even before, for fear of repercussion, not even.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, my mind just is reeling with their conversations up to the point of calling, who blew the whistle and why and all of that. But but that was one event. And it was actually during Banned Books Week.
It was. Yeah. How ironic is that? It was literally during Banned Books Week last year. So far, that's been the only event. I definitely have sent lots of emails and have kind of been chatting with, folks about maybe doing an event and then kind of hear nothing, or maybe, don't get a response, which is totally fine. But yeah, that was the only actual big event, which I was kind of anticipating more, knock on wood, right now. Maybe I shouldn't say it in a volume.
Well, you have a second tour scheduled.
I do.
By the time this airs, you will have already done it, but your Pacific Northwest tour was not part of the original marketing plan.
No, it definitely wasn't. I got the opportunity. I'm going to be doing the keynote speech at Purdue University. They have a Women in Leadership Institute, so they have a conference. I will be doing the keynote, doing a workshop. After I got that opportunity, then I was like, Michelle, I'm going to be halfway across the country. You should just plan me a spring tour. She was like, okay. So yeah, I'll be going out there. I'm going to be on the news. Oh my gosh. I'm going to be doing my first recipe demo on the news. Whew.
That's great.
Big day.
Raspberry Bow is helping support that part of the tour in the Pacific Northwest as well.
Yeah, so Raspberry Bow planned and scheduled everything. I am paying for my own accommodations and stuff. But yeah, luckily, Michelle kind of scheduled and planned everything really nicely.
That's great.
Awesome. Do you feel like you hope to do another book?
I do. I definitely want to do another book. I think I kind of want to do a kid's cookbook, or something. I don't know.
We did a great chat with two authors who did a Juneteenth kids cookbook.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. You're talking about Taffy and Aaliyah. Oh my gosh. So good.
We had them on the show back when the book came out. So that book just sparks with me what you are maybe talking about.
That book is incredible. I love it so much. And also, I really loved that episode. When I saw that they were the guests, I was like, ah!
That's great.
Yeah, it was a fantastic episode. That book is fabulous.
Before we wrap up, I know a lot of our listeners work on their own books and work on other people's books. And I think the work that you do, your sensitivity reading that you do as, part of your consulting and other work. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I review books for Kirkus, which are already published. All Kirkus reviewers are anonymous, but the equity and sensitivity readings I do for Penguin Random House Canada, specifically Tundra. So the head editor will send me a PDF of a picture book that's probably 90% finished. I review it for maximum inclusion and diversity and kind of give a report and offer, things that critical errors, non-critical errors, things like that. So if I was looking at a picture book, okay, say it's a public swimming pool in the illustration, that I might say, oh, I'm noticing that there's not a ramp going into the pool building. There's only stairs. I think that a ramp should be illustrated. Oh, I am noticing all of the lifeguards are white. I don't think all the lifeguards should be white. You don't have a chairlift to go into the water, sort of that kind of thing. So it might even not necessarily be about the text in the story or the main characters. It's ensuring that the incidental representation is as broad and as celebratory and inclusive as it can be. And sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't.
Yeah. How did you end up finding that work?
I actually have a colleague who lives in Toronto. Her name is Rabia. Somebody, I think, asked her if she had any teacher friends. And so she recommended me. Kind of lucked into it. But I would say the advice, because folks have asked me this question before, the main interest from the publisher was that I had a strong education background with teaching, and that also I was interested in the DEI inclusion kind of thing.
Yeah. In cookbooks, some books go through sensitivity reads and sometimes multiple. I was curious how that works. So thank you for sharing.
Well, it's interesting how specialized it is. I hadn't. Of course, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, any other words of advice for cookbook authors or people who maybe want to combine a cause that they're passionate about with some kind of book project?
I think my advice is no one will work as hard as you will on the project. And I think going into it, that's really important, is knowing that you'll be your number one champion. Also, you can't edit what's not on the page. So I found it really helpful, even if I wasn't jazzed about what I was writing. Like, if I'm getting it out and I'm writing, then at least if it's garbage, I can edit garbage. I can't edit thin air.
That's a great little soundbite.
Very well said. That's great. I might take that. Corrie, thank you so much for spending time with us and for this book. Congratulations.
Thanks so much for letting me talk your ear off for so long.
Yeah, we love it.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. The show is edited by Abby Circatella and produced by us. We rely on listener support to keep the show going, and the best way to show your support is to subscribe wherever you get your audio and leave us a review. We also invite you to join the Everything Cookbooks community by signing up for our Substack newsletter. Members will get show notes, info about guests, sneak peeks at upcoming episodes, and access to the community chat. If you have questions, guest ideas, want to buy a book mentioned on the show, are interested in advertising opportunities, or just want to buy some cool Everything Cookbooks merch, check out our website, everythingcookbooks.com. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.